Eu gostaria, então, inicialmente, de convidar o Ted a fazer parte da mesa. Please to the table. E espero que o inglês não seja um problema, tá? Ele vai falar, a gente já cansou de pedir, e ele já está aprendendo a falar bem pausadamente e com calma. E também na parte de perguntas, ao fim, quem precisar, então, a gente também pode ajudar na tradução da pergunta, caso seja necessário. E as perguntas, então, devem ser feitas no microfone para que a gente, então, grave a pergunta também na filmagem. Antes de iniciar, eu gostaria também de fazer uma colocação a respeito de organização. Existem várias pessoas de indústria e de universidades de outras cidades que vieram para cá. E nós vamos, então, depois da palestra, indo almoçar no Hotel Azuri. Então, a gente já tem uma reserva por um número de pessoas. Então, quem quiser, então, depois esperar aqui ao fim da palestra, nós iremos todos juntos. E seria uma honra ter vocês com a gente no almoço, tendo a chance também de conversar um pouco mais pessoalmente com o Ted sobre o que ele vai estar falando. Tá bom? Bom, um pouco sobre o núcleo de manufatura avançada, para quem não conhece. Ele é um núcleo formado a partir de um projeto de manufatura integrada por computador, iniciado em 89. E há 2 anos, a gente foi, então, escolhido como o primeiro centro de excelência em manufatura no Brasil, dentro do projeto Pronex. Ou seja, o primeiro centro de excelência reconhecido pelo Ministério de Ciência e Tecnologia. Tá? E também fica aqui um convite para quem quiser, então, depois do almoço, fazer uma visita ao núcleo. Tanto eu como os alunos que fazem parte do núcleo estão à disposição para dar uma rodada e explicar os projetos e os trabalhos que existem dentro do núcleo. Tá? Bom, um pouco sobre o tema, né? Manufatura avançada ou tendências. Acho que o objetivo da palestra de hoje é muito mais do que se dar um roteiro, do que pode se fazer para chegar naquilo que a gente chama de manufatura avançada. É muito mais compartilhar com vocês de uma visão, a visão do TED e da visão que ele representa dos setores, assim, principalmente da parte de agilidade, manufatura ágil, e que ele vai tentar estar passando para a gente aqui. Tá? Um dos temas chaves, e foi por isso que eu entrei em contato com ele, é o que a gente chama de empresas virtuais. Então, ele vai estar focando um pouco sobre o tema empresas virtuais, mas num senso maior de virtualidade, de negócios dinâmicos. A gente já teve a oportunidade de assistir a palestra, uma palestra bastante agradável, é uma história que ele vai estar contando para a gente. E espero que vocês, então, enjoy the speech. Então, gostaria de passar a palavra para o Ted e ele, então, faz a sua apresentação também.
Are you ready? Okay, I'm going to stand up here. Actually, I might be able to use this. If I wear this here, can you hear me? Is it working? Yeah. I gave a short version of this talk last night and had the pleasure of having it be translated into Portuguese. And I just imagined these really beautiful ideas being translated into this really beautiful language. Today, you're not so lucky. Huh? You get beautiful ideas in my sort of ugly English, and I hope that I can get the idea across. I'm really embarrassed that I don't speak Portuguese, but I hope I can make up for it by giving you kind of a fun time. Actually, I had no idea how I was introduced. I'm sure it was a fine introduction. Oops. Let's see. Won't be able to get them all on. Let's see. I'll just use one transparency to introduce both myself and these ideas. In the United States, there's something that you should know about how manufacturing research is sponsored in the United States. It's not at all like it is here or in Germany, where the work is primarily done by academics and it's done and published. All the results are published. In the United States, most of the manufacturing technology research has been sponsored since World War II by the Department of Defense. This is part of the big Cold War strategy that was put into place after World War II. And the primary agency that has sponsored it is an agency that you might have heard of called ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. You might have heard of them because they invented the ARPA net. They were the primary sponsor of all the artificial intelligence research. In the 50s, they invented relational databases. In fact, Oracle was a project of ARPA. So they've had their hand in an awful lot of things. In the 60s, late 50s and 60s, they sponsored a series of work on computer integrated manufacturing and invented some of the standards that are being used today. ICAM, definition modeling language, which is very popular. And they invented numerical tool control. But at a certain point in their history, I'm not going to give you a long history, I just want to tell you about the last few projects that I was involved in. They decided that we had a serious crisis in manufacturing. Things were getting too complex. Organizations were getting too complex. Products were getting too complex. And they were just costing much, much, much too much. Let me give you a simple example. Today in America, if you buy a car, the price of it. 70% of what's in that car, the value that's in that car, comes from not from pricing, it comes from its suppliers. It comes from people that already make stuff, and then they assemble it and price it. So 30% of the value added comes from pricing. Well, that includes the design of the car and the advertising and all liability insurance and everything. But when you buy the car, 70% of the dollars go to pricing. 70% of the dollars for 30% of the value. Why do they need all that extra money? And it's because they do essentially the coordinating. They're there not to build the car, but to coordinate everybody else that does all the work. And we have this problem, particularly the military had this problem in weapon systems where the multiplier is much, much higher. They built an airplane costs over $2 billion a piece. But there's only $300,000 worth of value in the airplane, and all the rest is because of coordination. The reason is for cars, airplanes, whatever, an airplane takes 15 years to design and build. But almost every technology in that airplane changes, even every 5 years, every 3 years. And so midway through the project, you're redesigning, you're changing, you're improving, and everyone has to know. So they put, I mean, if you think about it, $2 million, $1.5 billion per airplane wasted. It's worth spending a lot of money to do research. So we sponsored a project on current engineering. Current engineering defined this way was, you had a prime contractor and you had what now today we're going to be calling a virtual enterprise. You had all of the suppliers because you're just designing the tail at the same time that you're designing the engine, that you're designing the control system. And you want everybody to be working all together. You don't want it so that somebody makes a decision and then he passes the drawings to somebody else and they make the decision, because you want to make incremental refinements. So we sponsored a research project. Really, the main reason I'm telling you about these projects is so you can see the dollars, right? We spent $120 million on concurrent engineering research. Then we had a crisis in the semiconductor industry. You probably know the semiconductor industry was in big trouble in the United States about 10 years ago. And so we got $1 billion from the industry and $1 billion from the government, and we built a research project called CETEPE. It's $2 billion. $2 billion just purely for manufacturing research. It's a lot of money. And the focus of the project was enterprise integration, because you might think that the primary product of the semiconductor industry is semiconductors. But that's not true at all. The primary product of the semiconductor industry is semiconductor factories. That's the hard part. That's where the core competencies come in, because you've got to build a factory using technology that's completely different than your last factory. You have 3,000 suppliers of products, processes, and equipment that go in that factory. And these factories cost $1 billion. Back then, it cost $1 billion a piece. Now they cost almost $1.5 billion, $2 billion a piece. And you've got 6 months to get that factory totally integrated and perfectly working. So you have very, very high yields. Then 3.5 years later, the entire factory is obsolete. They all get bolted. So we spent a lot of energy on this. Well, today we're going to be talking about virtual enterprise integration technology. Then there's a variety of things that we did with Europe, which perhaps we could talk about in the question period if you're interested, to try and transfer technology. Out of this project came some things you may have heard of, Java, Corba, the Common Object Request Broker Architecture, and some very large consortia in the US to try and build enterprise integration products, which involved some large companies. Then, following that, we decided that there was we had been making a mistake. A lot of our focus was to make things better, faster, and cheaper. It was because we thought that was what was important in business. Better, faster, cheaper. Especially cheaper, 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 cheaper. And it turns out that for many, many, many things, that's not the most important thing. It's important for your pencil factory, which I drove by the other day. You can't sell pencils unless your pencils are cheaper than everybody else's. But there are many, many cases where the guy who gets there first is the guy who wins. Nike doesn't make money because they have the cheapest shoes. They make money because they have the coolest shoes. The automobile industry in the United States, the way that the automobile industry worked the last 2 years was very strange. Americans fell in love with sports utility vehicles, big Jeep things. They make no sense whatsoever. They use all excessive gasoline. They're big, heavy things. They cost a whole lot of money. They're the largest selling item in the US. And because Ford was agile enough, and this is where we're going to use a lot, agility. They're agile enough to see that market opportunity, completely change their tooling, address that market. They were able to wipe out billions of dollars of Japanese market that used to be there in the United States. So what we did was we focused on the ability to have new generation sort of organizations called agile organizations. So I'm going to introduce, the way this is going to go is I'm sort of going to introduce some ideas. I'm sort of going to show you some evidence of the techniques and the results, but I'm not going to give you a tutorial on the results because frankly we don't have enough time, and if I focus too much on the techniques to use if you were a business person or an enterprise engineer, then you would probably miss the big picture. So I'm just going to give some introductory slides about the ideas and show you some evidence of the results, and then we're going to do the fun part. I'm going to give you case studies and examples because we ran many, many case studies. We sponsored many, many experiments in business, and we have some historical case studies, so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. And as part of this example thing, I've already mentioned the fact that Toyota, who sort of set the standard for better, faster, cheaper, was the guy that got really burned with this idea of agility. I'm sorry about these slides here. And as a result, they have actually spent a fair amount of time with us learning how to become unlean. Right? You know, in Toyota, the Toyota production system, you basically get rid of everybody that doesn't really focus in on your end product. Yeah? You get rid of extra suppliers, get rid of extra people, extra managers, work in progress and such. And let me give you an example why they did that. This was it was actually something that we uncovered. It happened several years ago. You probably know, maybe you don't. We have now that the Germans had bought it. We had a car company in the United States called Chrysler.
They were a terrible car company. Terrible. They made absolutely horrid cars, and expensive cars that broke, and it even looked bad. And so they were in big trouble. They were in really big trouble.
And because of the Japanese invasion, American car companies thought they had to do what the Japanese were doing, which was get lean. And one of the principles of lean is to reduce the number of your suppliers. So, Ford had 200 steering wheel suppliers. Because in the United States, the way it used to work was, whoever had the best steering wheel, the lowest price, that's who we went with. And if you didn't have the best price tomorrow, well, goodbye, I'll see you. I'm going to go with another guy. No loyalty at all. Very, very cruel system compared to the Japanese system, which is one steering wheel supplier. You provide steering wheels, you make them perfect. It's very easy for us to manage you. It's very easy for us to integrate with you. Ford had 200. They said we have to get lean down to 3. Right? Worked really great. Good steering wheels, nice workflow, nice and lean, lowered costs. Chrysler, a guy named Lee Iacocca that we were working with at the time, he said, I'm in real trouble here. First of all, I don't make good product. And second of all, I can't afford to become lean. I can't afford the shock to my business to become lean, because usually only healthy companies can afford to make those kinds of transitions. So he said, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to hit Ford where they're the weakest. So he put together a strategy, we advised him a little bit on this, where he went on television and he announced to America that the most important part of your car was safety. And because he cared about your children, he was going to put an airbag in every car. 6 months, airbag. And they weren't lame. They had the same 200 suppliers, same 200 steering wheel suppliers. He was able to go to those 200 steering wheel suppliers and say, who can put an airbag in a steering wheel? And in just a few weeks, he had his steering wheel. He was able to put it in the car. He was able to sell these safe cars. Ford, it took them 2 years, because they went to their 3 steering wheel suppliers and said, give us an airbag. And they said, what? You told us to fire our research department because they weren't important. You told us to get rid of all this extra stuff because you thought that the steering wheel was going to be a certain way. It took them 2 years to respond. That was a way of using agility, agile manufacturing, as a strategic weapon against the enemy. And as it turns out, I think that there are a whole lot of industries where it doesn't matter if you're the low-cost producer. If you're so narrowly focused that your competition can outflank you with agility. Let me give you another example of agility used as a competitive weapon. I hope this works. We have, in the U.S., we have this phenomenon of fast food. We have many, many fast food places, but 10 years ago, McDonald's was the king. McDonald's had more fast food burger places than all the competition put together. Burger King was number 2, but it was very, very far distant number 2. And the reason was McDonald's just had a better hamburger. I mean, they had worked out a lean production system. The only thing you could buy was a hamburger. And you buy double hamburger, you buy cheeseburger. But it only came with pickles already on it, mayonnaise already on it, lettuce and tomato already on it. You couldn't get it any other way. And the reason was because they had this really wonderful, lean manufacturing system in the back. Their kitchen was all set up, so the grill was exactly the right size for 8 hamburgers all piled up like this, another 8 like this, and then they developed a spatula that was just long enough, to scoop up the thing. And they had the mustard dispensers were, 8 mustard dispensers on a rack, so you just, 8 things would go on a hamburger. And this was such a refined process, they literally had something called Hamburger University that they would send these kids to learn how to do all these lean processes so they get the extra ½ cent out of the price of the hamburger. Burger King couldn't compete. I mean, they just couldn't compete. If they were going to play by McDonald's rules, they just couldn't compete. So they changed the rules. What they did was they went on television and they said, you come to our restaurant, you can get your hamburger without a pickle. You can have it your way. You want it without the lettuce? Okay, we'll give it to you without the lettuce. And it meant that the hamburgers were a little more expensive. The kitchen was sort of not optimized at all. It took a little bit longer, but people came to Burger King. And then Burger King said, well, you know, you come here and we can give you a chicken sandwich. We can give you a chicken sandwich. Because we have a general purpose kitchen in the back. We have sort of general purpose things. And McDonald's, they couldn't adapt. Their kitchen was optimized to make extremely lean production technique for hamburgers. Well, the bottom line was, without getting into details, in order to survive, McDonald's had to go to every restaurant, tens of thousands of restaurants, and spend billions of dollars ripping out all that stuff, throwing away their lean production techniques, and putting in general purpose kitchens, so that if one guy offered a chicken sandwich or a pork sandwich or whatever, they could offer that too. And as a result, Burger King now in the U.S. is almost as big as McDonald's, because they used agility as a strategic weapon. Well, agility, as it turns out, is like many other things in business. Mostly it's intuition. Mostly you sort of guess at a strategy, and you hope that it's right. And what we wanted to do with our agile manufacturing thing was, we wanted to bring some science to it. Right? We wanted you to be able to understand and model agility so that you could plan agility, make decisions, decisions about agility, so that you could optimize your organization for agility, just like you now do for lean manufacturing. Here's some other examples. I guess I won't belabor them. Most of you remember when word processing meant typewriters. IBM absolutely owned the typewriter market, absolutely owned it. Remember the little Selectric typewriter with the ball, you know? And they had the world market just absolutely wrapped up. Along came a young fellow with a $500 investment from MIT, and he invented a dedicated word processor, built a multi-billion-dollar business, Wang Laboratories, and completely demolished typewriters. I mean, typewriter in the United States today, you really almost can't buy a typewriter. Demolished this business. I remember IBM, they sort of made computers at the time, but their real business was typewriters. Kill them. And so I interviewed Wang at the time, and Wang said, we are really in good shape. We're a multi-billion-dollar company, and no matter what IBM throws at us, multi-billion-dollar companies just don't go away. IBM offered a personal computer that had word processing software. So you get a computer that does word processing, but it also does spreadsheets, and does a lot of other stuff. 18 months, Wang Laboratories is bankrupt. You probably never even heard of them, most of you. Then all of a sudden, along comes Microsoft, and completely steals the word processing business from IBM. I mean, it's a very turbulent market. I'm not going to talk about the electronic games business. I'm not going to talk about the fact that at one time in the U.S., vacuum tube manufacturers had a stranglehold on the future of the electronics industry. They don't anymore. They're complete has-beens. In fact, if you look at the Fortune 50, which is a list of the top companies in the U.S., and they have a Fortune 80 for top companies in the world, you only have to go back a few years before half of those companies are not on the list. They're gone. They're out of business. And the reason is not because they weren't profitable, not because they weren't lean, because they weren't well managed. It's because the earth shifted, the world moved, and they were unable to adapt. So that's agility. Let me introduce another concept, virtual enterprise. Now these go hand in hand, and most of the examples I'm going to give you are agile virtual enterprises. But right now, for a moment, let's talk about virtual enterprises. We invented the term, and we spent a lot of energy looking at how virtual enterprises would work. Because think of it, if 70% of the value of a Chrysler comes from the suppliers, What do you really need Chrysler for? If you can figure out some way of organizing those suppliers, I'll actually tell you later on about a real case that we developed to manufacture cars with no prime contractor at all. We actually do this with airplanes to some extent right now. Really complex military aircraft. But people came to us and they said, well, you know, I'm Ford and I have suppliers, and that's a virtual enterprise. And we had to say, well, yeah, that's a virtual enterprise. We had people come to us, and we have many that we actually sponsored in the U.S., which are small companies that come together to sort of market themselves as a unit to appear to a customer as if they were a larger company. We say, well, that's a virtual enterprise. So, yeah, that's a virtual. They had all these different kinds of virtual enterprises. So we developed sort of a way of dividing them up so that we could get the engineering principles right. So what I want to sort of introduce you to are 4 types of virtual enterprise. And I'm going to give you examples of them all, but some of them are more interesting than others. And on the right, what we have is virtual enterprises where you are a business. You have capabilities and resources, and what you want to do is you want to sell those. So a bidding consortium, which is sort of like the kind of virtual enterprise that most people start out with when they're experimenting with this, is the case. It also is the case if you are Lockheed. Now Lockheed is 200 companies with one name. And it's basically a lot of enterprises, they're individual profit centers, that try to sort of get together to build space stations and satellites and aircraft and what have you. So they're a virtual enterprise of this kind. But the idea is, I've got resources, I want to find an opportunity. Over on the left is opportunity driven. In other words, somebody identifies an opportunity. He may have resources, may not have resources, usually he doesn't. And then he goes and assembles the resources to be able to address the opportunity. Probably the best example of that is Michael Dell. Michael Dell says, you know, I think I could sell computers by telephone and eliminate the middleman. He had no experience in computers. Actually, he had tried the thing before with stereo components, and it failed. But he said, no. So he started this thing. Michael Dell has almost no employees, almost none. He didn't then, he doesn't now. They're the #2 computer supplier in the U.S. in terms of units. Compaq is #1. And what he did was he hired people to make the components, hired some other folks to assemble them, hired some other folks to ship them, hired some other folks to actually literally answer the phone and say, this is Dell computer. He has about 20 employees, and all they do is capture money. And it's virtual enterprise where he assembled things really quickly, and the reason that he's at the top of the heap is because he was able to capitalize on the idea fast. So that the established guys couldn't. Now, that's the left and the right. What distinguishes the bottom from the top of the chart in both cases is the virtual enterprises at the bottom of the chart. They aggregate, and so that the boundary between the companies are conventional business boundaries. I make something, I'll sell it to you, you pay me for that something, product or service. And there's not a whole lot of tinkering around with the internals of the company. I mean, it's just a sort of modules that glop together like balls. But we have a variety of more interesting cases, much more novel cases, much more competitive cases, sort of at the top, where we actually do tinker. We almost throw away the old business models. So we have virtual enterprises where a guy from company A, who's an expert of some kind, is working in a building that's owned by company B, on a piece of equipment owned by another company, maybe using a process from another company, and being supervised by another company, and yet a different company pays him a paycheck. We have many situations like this. I'll explain them to you later. And the difficulty is, not only do you have to model it and manage it the way that you would manage individual businesses, but all those individual businesses have to be paid fairly. They've all got to be recompensed for the cost of resources, the hard stuff like, well, what if you invent something? You know? Who owns the invention? If it's like in this aspect, that's because of good management maybe or whatever. Who gets the rights to that invention? Product has a liability. You know, when the product has a real problem and you get sued, who's responsible? You know, some very complex things which we think we have some good solutions for. I don't know if this will translate well, this idea of promiscuous. The idea of promiscuous is that you have many liaisons and they're very inexpensive. It's inexpensive to get together, try out an idea or a market. If the market doesn't work, you haven't lost a whole lot because of dissolution, you go back to being happy to find some other collection of partners. It's low cost, frequent combining and recombining and dissolution to be able to identify and address opportunities, to be able to maximize your core competencies. And just a couple slides to show you that we actually have developed some results. I'm not going to give you a tutorial for sure, but we have a number of things that merge well with existing management ideas. Business process modeling primarily, existing product strategies that are out there. And one of the things that we have done, this has turned out to be a fairly useful collection of concepts. And what it is these 5 major phases of a virtual enterprise. How you identify the opportunity that you're going to be addressing. You have to identify and evaluate it and perhaps do simulations on the numbers involved. Now remember, these might be agile virtual enterprises, so you might actually be making something that's never been made before. So you're going to be taking a lot of analytical chances because you'll be using processes, perhaps, or combinations to address markets never been addressed. Identify opportunity, identify your partners. Obviously, if you already have your partners, you do those in reverse. A whole lot of really hard stuff associated with discovering who does what and how people get paid for what they do. If you do all this properly, then you operate the operation more or less like a regular enterprise with a few extra things added. And then there's this very, very important a step in, well, the opportunity goes away or it changes. All opportunities at least change. And you have to reconfigure, reallocate risk-reward strategies or whatever. So within those, we have found a collection of things. Around each of these things, we've identified processes that are associated with agents and techniques that can be used. We've done a large number of case studies. So just from the, let's say, the anecdotal case study type approach to business management, we've pretty much populated that field with a collection of ideas that cut things at the joints that make sense. And this had, not all of this. By the way, you should know, you are an extremely lucky audience. These billions of dollars of research have not been fully published in the U.S. We just came to the end of a major cycle of projects. And advisors got together, senior advisors got together, and the question was, well, what next? Well, Ted, you have 2 jobs next. One of them is to write the standard collected encyclopedia of all these research results. And number 2, go to Brazil. Go to Brazil because with some of these ideas and some other latent strengths that Brazil has in your lifetime, which 15, 20 years, Brazil's going to be the next powerhouse, manufacturing powerhouse of the world. And that's from some pretty serious folks. Later on, I'll tell you why. I hope I get to, if I don't, I hope you will remind me to tell you why they think that. But some of these ideas, we're spending a few weeks here with Numa. They're already sort of up on some of these, of course, and we're transferring the technology to them. Here's another parsing of the universe. You know, when you build an enterprise, it's really many layers of an enterprise. You have to build an infrastructure that's associated with the actual tools and equipment facilities. You have to build an infrastructure that's associated with how the work happens. You have to build an infrastructure that's associated with the business processes and business culture, legal agreements, and all this other business, on. And it turns out that the way the world works in each one of these worlds is different. So the way that you configure the laws that are associated with how you configure your contracts are different than the laws that are associated with how you move product from one machine tool to another machine. So when you model those things, you have a completely different set of behavior that you have to account for in your model. So any real model of an enterprise has many, many models that are all coordinated. We show some dependencies here. I won't explain those. But there are some dependencies. So your business culture affects your business processes, for instance. So if you take these infrastructures that you create and simultaneously create and manage, if you're a big company, you manage them, and these steps, which I just showed you, that's the framework we have for integrating in with existing business modeling techniques. All right, so much for tutorial stuff. Let me give you some fun stuff. One of the things we tried to do was discover how enterprises work, virtual enterprises work, what makes them successful. And has anybody ever done it before? Well, usually when you think that something is required and they send you out with a whole lot of money to invent it, you assume that nobody's done it before. And we discovered, of course, that's not the case at all. If you think of it, the construction industry, when you build a house or you build a place, that's a virtual enterprise, right? You assemble all the skills together. Somehow there's mechanisms for getting them all on the job site. Everybody knows what to do. They're all coordinated. But we found something that wasn't known before, at least not in this way. I have to tell you about the whaling industry in the U.S. Whaling industry. This is where you go out, you kill a whale, you cut it all up by the side of the ship, you boil this blubber down, you get this oil. And you come back and you sell the oil. They killed whales for the oil, two kinds of oil. One, the big oil from the blubber. And then there's a little pack of oil behind the whale's head. It's this very, very fine, extremely fine lubricating oil, which is by weight more valuable than gold in those days. And I have to tell you that this was a profound industry in the U.S. Profound. It was a bigger percentage of the gross national product in that time than semiconductors is today, in terms of absolute dollars. If you look at what economists call the multiplier effect, which is the number of industries and innovations that were spawned by the industry compared to semiconductors, it was still more important. And one of the reasons was because you were able to have this very fine lubricating oil. It made possible mass production of precision machined items, which meant that every person could own a watch. That revolutionized the way the business was done. Because previously, if you were coordinating a contractor, it wasn't a contractor, it was an employee. You could walk down to the other side of the building, you could grab them by the ear and say, I need to talk to you. Now you could hire another company and say, 2 o'clock, we're going to have a meeting. Even. Fundamental change. In fact, in a way, a social anthropologist that studied these things said that was a much more fundamental change to society than computers have been today. I'll just tell you some things about this whaling industry. One of the most interesting things is it was dominated, absolutely dominated for the entire 60 years by one little island off the coast of Massachusetts. All the people are in Massachusetts. All the whales are in the northern Pacific. These people have to sail around South America to get to work. It takes them 6 months to get to work. Everybody in the world wants to be part of the whaling business. The Japanese, the Finns, everybody. Why does America, who has all these structural disadvantages compared to the industry, Why did they dominate the industry for so long, with so many efforts? I mean, we didn't have the greatest seafaring resources. We didn't have the greatest use even for the product, because it came to Nantucket and most of it went to Europe. We didn't even have a national policy. The government was sort of, we'll work with you. And other governments really had an industrial policy where they wanted to capture the whaling industry. In fact, at one point, they spent money to go to Nantucket and said, if we captured all the whalers and we were able to entice them to move to England, then we'd have the whaling industry. So they built an exact copy of Nantucket off the coast of England to be able to entice these folks over. Big failure. Why did it work? Why did it work? Worked because it was a virtual enterprise. And I want to underscore a few things about the power of virtual enterprise here. A ship comes in from a voyage. These voyages last 2 or 3 years. The ship comes in from a voyage, and it's usually pretty beat up, and it takes 6 months to fix it. The formation of the virtual enterprise takes 6 months. There's a guy that owns the ship. He ties up with the captain. Now, the captain is a business. And they go and find, let's say they find a cooper, a barrel maker, because you need to have barrels be manufactured while you're sailing to work. That's how they spent that time. That barrel maker was a business. You would hire the business. You get the master barrel maker, you'd get a few apprentices, you'd get, he would supply all the wood and the tools and everything. It would be his responsibility. He was assigned a certain area of the ship. So you had the barrel maker, you had the ship's carpenter, you had the fellow who owned the furnace that did the rendering, and then all the tools and fuel that was associated with that. But by the way, these guys would have to cut deals because
the guy that burned stuff in the furnace to render the blubber bought the scrap lumber from the barrel maker. Yeah? So they have these internal deals. And everybody on that ship is in it for a piece of the action. That's how they get paid. All in for a piece of the action. And I've been to the museum, and you should see these contracts. They're instant contracts, what we call today instant contracts.
it's a tiny little piece of paper. It says the voyage, the guy's name, signed X, because usually they were little. And then percentage. If you've read Moby Dick, which is an interesting book, you'll remember that the Queequeg, the very talented, strong harpooner, got a higher percentage of the voyage, of the take, because he was such a strong guy. But everybody was in. The apprentices, everybody was in for a piece of the action. So if they came back with nothing, that was it. But a lot of times they came back, and some of these people became very local. So much other things. They had the instant contracts, I told you. One of the things that made this strong was even successful voyages, they never put the same team together twice. Sometimes the same captain would go on the same ship, but he would always have a different combination. Never the same barrel maker, never the same set of harpooners, never the same mates. They would switch it all around. And of course this, as you can imagine, spread the wealth among this small community, homogenized the processes, transferred all of what's called technology among this small community so that everyone was able to be lifted at the same time. Here's an interesting thing. The captains were really good note takers. Wherever they went, they wrote it down. We saw a whale. There was a whale of this time. The wind was blowing so. The temperature was such. There was clouds in the sky. Writes down. And when he gets back from his trip, now remember, this is 3 years of collecting data, he would freely share all that information with the other captains. There's nobody else, just the captains. This is today what we would call process plans. Because the guy who is successful is the guy that shows up where the whales are. And when you have an accumulated experience of thousands of voyages, and there were thousands of voyages, then you were able to always be. The Norwegians, they would send ships out. They could never be where the whales were because they had these amazing cycles. Or they go and they find a whale and they wouldn't know that, you don't want to touch these guys, not now, because they're very dangerous. Well, there's a whole lot more I can say about what makes the whaling industry work. And I'll draw some basic rules for everybody in a moment, later when I extend the thing. But I want to tell you, I want to give you two examples. Now, agility is the ability to respond to unexpected change. Unexpected change comes in two flavors, right? There's the bad stuff that happens that you have to adapt to, or maybe go out of business or get really hurt. But there's the good stuff. There's the good stuff where you recognize like a market opportunity or new process is developed that you need to incorporate really quickly to be able to catch your competitor off hand. And virtual enterprise is very much more able to respond to this. Here's an example. In the middle of the life of the whaling industry, gold was discovered in California. This is pretty big stuff. The guy who gets there to the gold field first is the winner. But you have to get there and be organized. You gotta have equipment, you gotta have a team that's organized, because one guy can't get this gold out of it. I mean, once in a while you can find it in the middle, but you need a team of people. So the first people that could get there that were organized became, well, multi-billionaires in today's terms. Well, sure enough, the whalers were the first ones to hear about it. They were in the area. They sailed to San Francisco. They abandoned their ships, actually just deserted them right there in the day. Went off, and these are actually really famous stories. And they struck it rich. They became extremely wealthy. All the skills that were needed for the mining were the same skills they had, more or less, for whaling. They knew the furnace business. They knew the carpenters to shore things up. They didn't need sailmakers. And that's an interesting story of agility in itself. One of the most famous of these stories, the sailmaker that was abandoned was a guy named Levi Strauss. Okay? He's abandoned, he's got all these ships, he's got all these, he's a sailmaker. They don't need a sailmaker. He's got all these sails from all these abandoned ships. He's got all these people that are out there turning themselves and their clothes all to pieces. He says, I can make blue jeans. Right? He got into the blue jean business because he had all the canvas and the rivets and stuff. In fact, we still have rivets today in our blue jeans that are in emulation of those whaler sail rivets, which were different than the rivets that everybody else uses. It's kind of interesting thing. There's a patent on that copy of the design, by the way. And Levi's makes money off of everybody else's jeans who patents that design. Kind of an interesting thing. They make almost as much money off their patent as they do off their jeans. These people knew how to work with extremely valuable substances without killing each other. That was a rare discipline in those days. They knew how to not drink. You know, that was a real problem among the miners. They knew how to take orders. They knew how to work for 2 or 3 years with no reward. They knew how to trust the system. And the system that they used was exactly the same share. The same share they had for the whaling was what they got in the gold. Result was there was an opportunity that occurred. These guys were able to adapt. I'm taking too long right now. Give me a secret sign if I'm taking too long, so I can skip some. Okay, that was an example of something good that happened. Something bad happened. Something really bad. These guys spend all this energy to go across the world, halfway around the world to get oil, and somebody discovers that you can get oil just right out of the ground. You don't need to do all that. You can get all the oil you want to just by pumping it out of the ground. And you can imagine the shock that had to the industry in terms of potential market share loss. That was just as much in radical a shift as as Wang stealing the business from IBM in just a few months. This industry was much more agile because it was a virtual enterprise. I can tell you what they did. They said, okay, we've lost that market. We just can't compete with that. We're not going to play games here. What else can we go and get? So they launched a major campaign in Europe and the United States among the more wealthy class, and they were able to convince women to buy corsets. The history of corsets and underwear in the United States, girdles, they paid publications, they paid women's magazines to value the beauty of a really, really small waist. And the reason they did this was because they knew they could catch a different kind of a whale. Instead of going to the North Pacific to get oil, they went to the Arctic to catch a different kind of whale. This is a baleen whale. And this is a whale that has a huge mouth, pumps in many, many gallons of water, long, skinny teeth that are like a sieve, filters the water out, swallows the fish. These long, skinny teeth are called baleen. And you can easily weave these into fabric so they make corsets. And make parasols, umbrellas. So if you see pictures from those days, parasols, it was something completely artificial. It's an artificial product that was created by the whaling industry in order to sell this baleen. And buggy tops. And they sold buggy tops mostly because they were able to say that sunburned women were just really very unattractive. It's just, you didn't want the sun on your face. Had to help us. And because of this agile response, they were able to extend their investment, their skills, and for another 20, 30 years. A remarkable story of an agile adaptation of an industry from one to another, and the manipulation of the customer to create a market, because nobody needs corsets. Incidentally, because I'm in the government sponsorship business, I'll just let you know something interesting. There's a very, very bad record of the government sponsoring the right thing. Let me tell you a story about the tin can. Tin can was invented by the British because they needed to project power. They needed to send a military force on ship to, I don't know, India, and conquer the Indians. And it used to be that when you sent a military force, you couldn't possibly afford to send the food with them. You just sort of counted on them finding some food over there somehow, because the food was rotten, the way the British were doing it. And so they had to preserve food, and so they invented this idea of wrapping food up with metal. And that was 1810. And that actually was a major factor in the establishment and really explosive growth of the British Empire, because they were able to can food. But let me tell you something. 50 years later, the can opener was invented. And cans, no can opener. And the major users of these cans was the military. And the way you'd open these cans was, well, axes, shovels, knives. And in the American military, during that period of time, there were more casualties in the military from opening cans than from going to war. But in that 50 years, the American military sponsored a lot of research in tin cans. Big portion of the American military research budget went to tin can research. But they didn't invent the can opener until 50 years later. Where did they spend all that money on? Well, they spent the money on the size and shape of the cans. Right? Because the thing was, well, if we put it on a ship, we got to pack them this way so it doesn't chip. And then we put it on a carriage, well, they've got to be this size and shape. And then when they finally get to the field, they've got to go in a backpack. They've got to be this shape to fit next to the canteen or whatever. They're spending all this energy and all this money and all this stuff on the wrong thing, and they missed the most obvious thing. So the question was, here we had a critical industry to the United States, absolutely critical. It was the strongest part to the balance of payments. It was the incentive that made industry a world power, really, in terms of manufacturing. And and the Navy sponsored a lot of research. Almost all the research they sponsored was the wrong kind. Almost everything that they wanted, bigger ships, but the private ship makers were able to come up with better big ships. It's cannons that shot harpoons instead of throwing the harpoons. But business was able to come up with the better cannon, better than the Navy. Let me tell you where the Navy did something that really, really worked well. They came up with what we would call today business process modeling technology. They developed a standard way of these ship's captain's logs being written so that they could be codified and read really quickly. They developed a series of stamps. Instead of writing out, I saw 3 whales of this kind, and it was sunny. You had a stamp, 3 whales, sunny. And that simple innovation and a few other, what we would call syntactical things in the business process modeling, made this body of knowledge of the whaling process plans more reliable, more accessible, more, today we would call computable, in the sense that you could analyze it, be able to scan. Interesting. The real place to do research is in the representation technology, especially if what you're talking about is virtual enterprise stuff where you need to communicate. Let me tell you something interesting about this whaling virtual enterprise. The big thing about the whaling virtual enterprise was everybody trusted everybody else. They didn't trust everybody else because they trusted everybody else. They trusted everybody else because they had a contract. But the contract was, you get 120th of the profit. Well, almost every trip, something happened that was weird. A guy got sick. Say he got sick for 6 months, and he couldn't do his barrel making. So the crew has got to make do somehow. Everybody else pitches in. Then the guy gets well. He comes back and he says, I want my 100th share. They said, well, wait, you didn't do the work. I got the contract. Well, the reason that this worked, now in France they have something called code. Now, most of Europe is code-based. You have to understand the difference between code and case law. Code, when you write code, the legislative body writes a law. That's the law. I mean, what the words they've written, that's the law. And every time that law goes to trial, the judge and jury look at those words. That's the law. And that is the law until the legislative body changes the law and says, no, we forgot about something. Let me change and add something in there. America uses English law, case law, but they did it this time. Case law is really interesting. The legislative body writes the law. That's the law, what they wrote. Then the first time it goes to trial, the judge and jury make a decision, and their decision is exactly equal in importance to the language of the law. So you have what the legislator wrote, and then what the judge and jury decided. And over thousands and thousands of cases, and of course every law in America has many thousands of cases, and all of these cases become the law. So collectively, that's the language of the law. And the neat thing here is that somebody comes back from a whaling enterprise. He says, but this really strange thing happened. I was sick for 6 months. These other guys pitched in. How do I know how much to pay them? I mean, how do I know that my contract changes? Well, by the late maturity of this business, everything that had gone wrong had already gone wrong. People had sued. They'd gone to court. There'd been a decision. So all you have to do is look up in the case law. So functionally speaking, when they signed this little chip with their ex, they're basically signing a contract that had thousands and thousands of contract provisions in it by implication. So that if this weird thing happens, then you're going to get paid fairly this way. And they always knew that they could fall back on that. Well, I'm going to make this this idea of lightweight contracts was very important. There are a couple other must-haves in the virtual enterprise, but I'm going to skip over them for the moment and come back later. Because the oil business used, in fact, they were the same people. Whaling people in their case law and virtual enterprise contracts moved to the oiling industry. Oiling industry moved to Los Angeles, which was just a nothing town. They found oil. They all moved there. The movie people moved to Los Angeles, not because of the weather. Actually, the weather there was pretty bad. Because they were in Florida, where it was good for moving. They moved to California because of this virtual enterprise thing. You might not know it, but the biggest virtual enterprises in the world, the most successful virtual enterprise mechanism in the world is the U.S. movie-making industry. It uses the same techniques, literally the same case law from the whaling industry. When they decided to make Titanic, there's a bunch of guys sit around saying, okay, we're going to make Titanic, we're going to spend $200 million, let's go. A couple of weeks later, 2,000, 3,000 people out on the set making this movie. Might make the movie for 6 months, a year, year and a half. Only 3 or 4 or 5 people work for the movie company. Everybody else is hired as a virtual enterprise. Everybody else. The sets, the cameras, the labor, whatever. And almost all of them are in it for a piece of the action. And all of them are, when they sign contracts, you should see the contracts. Now we're talking about millions and millions of dollars worth of work, one page contracts. And it's because they're able to rely on case law. They also have this mechanism of certifying skills and capabilities. It's a big agent system. It sort of looks inefficient when you look at it from the outside, unless you realize that this is actually a very, very efficient way of identifying the right partner and getting that partner attuned to what you're doing. Because every movie is different. Actually, it's pretty different and require a real artistic sort of attunement so it all sort of congeals. And also, every movie, almost every movie, ends up being a different movie than what they started to make because they discover certain things and they make adjustments. There's an interesting history here. I don't know if I have time to mention it, but a year ago, the Japanese decided to tell us the things that they used when they reinvented their industrial economy after World War II. I spoke to Maria personally before he died, and he told me that Douglas MacArthur, who was the military governor of the conquered Japan at the time, said, go and study best practices somewhere, figure it out, come back, and just put it in place. You've got my special diplomatic passports to go and do this. They studied the American food production system. American food production was a miracle at the time. All the food was grown in California. Most of it was consumed in the East Coast. And it was just an absolute miracle that you could get a head of cabbage, all the way across this vast country. That was the basis of their lean manufacturing. But they studied the movie industry. They specifically studied Howard Hughes' movie business. Howard Hughes, his history was he made a fortune in the oil business using these virtual enterprise techniques. Then he decided to get into the movie business, mostly because of the girls, pretty girls. So he got into the movie business. But he took all of this case-based virtual enterprise stuff and used it in his movie business. And then when we got into war, he said, oh, I can make airplanes. So he got into the airplane business, transferred all this technology, and the precursor of the organization that I worked for, he was able to transfer this, what they call then, unit packet system. And we used it very successfully in World War II, and then forgot about it. It's a very interesting thing to tie in the whaling, the movie, the Japanese resurgence of remanufacturing, the defense response in the U.S. The defense response in the U.S. was, we got into the war, this almost doesn't matter whether you're talking World War I or World War II, unprepared. I'll tell you World War II. We went from something on the order of 1,000 airplanes at the beginning of World War II to 18 months later, we had made 175,000 airplanes. Now think of it. This isn't just the airplane. You have to build the fields, the airports. You have to build the sewer plants to support the training facilities, to train the pilots, because you're losing pilots now. It was a phenomenal thing, and they did it all using this virtual enterprise stuff. Piece of the action. You could do that in the U.S. because in those days we had case law. Well, I have some more stories. I think we're running a little late here. Let me just tell you, we used to have case law in the U.S., but it is an unacceptable truth in the U.S. that most of what's happened since World War II is we have started to move our legal system from case law to code. So we now have a really unhealthy mix in the U.S. between case law and code. And in particular, the defense industry is 100% code. The code is, this is the law, you know, there's no virtual enterprise case law for you to fall back on. And it's one reason why we're really in trouble here. There's an example I could tell you, perhaps if you're interested afterwards. I'll tell you the reason that I was able to get those $2 billion is there's a, do we have time for this? Yes. Yeah? I hate to use military examples, but that's the way it is. The United States' war-fighting strategy. The whole strategy is we control the air. Like we did in Iraq. We control the air, we shoot down the other guy's airplanes, and then we can sort of do what we want. And that whole strategy is we have a better airplane, can shoot down the other guy's airplane. And that whole strategy is our missile can shoot his before he shoots us. Our whole warfighting strategy, it's trillions and trillions of dollars, is all based on missile. That missile is A9M now. It's the 9th basic design, the nth revision. AIM is area eviction missile. And that's the standard missile that we and all of our NATO allies have. Everybody has. U.S. applies. In 1985, the CIA, who always gets surprised, I don't know why, in 1985, they discovered, they didn't even know, they didn't know anything, but they discovered in over Finland that some Soviet planes were flying a missile that was so much better than our missile that any time a Soviet airplane ran up against a United States airplane, the situation was. Saddam Hussein had these missiles. If their pilots had not run away, we would have lost Desert Storm. This is serious business. This is very serious. We know sometime in the future we will get involved in a conflict and we will be up against an adversary. The Soviet Union is selling these missiles like hotcakes because they're so good. Many people have them. Many people, Libya, Syria, North Korea. So, oh, bingo, we got to fix this problem. We got to fix this problem. And the fix was we're going to design missiles called AIM-9X, which is the next generation, big leap. Israelis used our missile. They said, whoa, we got to fix this. So you'll see there, the Israelis from 1985 to 1990, they designed a new missile, they built a new missile, they put it on their airplanes. Now they have a missile that's better than the Soviets, better than the US. Now that we're friends with the Soviets, the Russians, we went over there and asked them, how long did it take you to develop this missile in the first place? They said 6 years. 6 years. Let me tell you where we are in the US. We're midway through a 22-year procurement cycle. Sometime next century, 10 years from now, we will have a missile on our airplanes that is as good as what the Soviets had in 1985. How can this be? we've got more money than God when it comes to bombs and missiles. We've got the best technology in the world in that area. We've got an absolute compelling need to make this happen. And the problem is, when the Soviets did it, the Soviets were 100% case law, code, 100% code. They basically put down the law. They literally, if you don't do well, we'll shoot you. The Israelis have 100%, or something like case law in Israel. All such fuzzy decisions are decided by religious authorities, so it's a religious law there that you can find. It's a lot like the case law system, but it's 100% that way. And they entered into these contracts, very lightweight contracts, and they use this, basically the fallback of the rabbis, and they were able to do it very quickly. In the US, we've got a mix. We have code between the customer and the prime contractor, and case law between the prime contractor and the subcontractors. And it's a very bad situation, very bad, very bad. So some of the successful agile virtual enterprises that we've invented have a special act of Congress that allows them to bypass all of the US law and use instead some emulation of case law. I don't think I'll tell you the other examples because they sort of get into cultural problems associated with the agile virtual enterprise in the movie industry. Very interesting example, I'll be happy to share with you later about Waterworld. Everybody knows that was the world's biggest disaster. And it was a movie. It was a disaster because the Japanese bought American film companies to reinvigorate agility in their manufacturing system. And there was a cultural mismatch on that one movie that cost them a whole lot of money. I'd be happy to share that with you. Yeah, we're okay time-wise, right? Yes. A couple months ago, there was a National Research Council commission put together to figure out what to do next. And as I said, one of the things that they did with me was they said, let's transfer this technology as much and as fast and as cheaply as possible to the rest of American business, but the rest of the world too. So we're midway through the production of this very large encyclopedic book of results. I hope you'll be able to find it in about 2 or 3 months when it hits the bookshelves before. The second thing is they said, start to revolutionize industry in the world. This is a difficult strategy, but what they decided was, if we're going to affect change in the U.S., the U.S. is a really very broken economy in terms of manufacturing improvements. If you're going to make change, you have to create a threat. So go to the country that you think can best use these kinds of techniques. And so we charted this study, and we came up with the list of countries that were potential manufacturing powerhouses in the next generation. And who do you think was at the very top of the list? Who do you think? You were going to say Brazil, weren't you? No. Iran is at the top of the list. Iran. And one of the reasons is they got a lot of money, they have a large educated middle class, and they have this case law. Sort of. It's all based on Islamic law. It's all decided by the religious authorities. Let me tell you a virtual enterprise that's there. We have studied in some detail the Iranian food distribution system. Is the most interesting virtual enterprise you will encounter. In the rest of the world, somebody grows something, it passes through many hands, and then somebody finally buys it. But at each time that it gets passed through somebody's hands, that person gets paid. The person gets paid for doing something, growing it, delivering it, inspecting it, or whatever. And that's all facilitated by the fact that we have capital money system. You can borrow money. So you borrow money. Nobody really gets any money back until that head of lettuce is sold. So everyone's borrowing money all along. Well, in Islamic law, it's an act against God to lend money. It's not allowed. It's not allowed in Islamic law. You can allow somebody to use money, but you can't charge interest. Okay? It's so radically different than what we have here. So the way that their food distribution system works, they've completely reinvented the way that business works. The way the food distribution system works is everybody who's involved in that head of lettuce does what he does for a piece of the price that head of lettuce eventually sells for. So if the lettuce sells for a lot of money, he makes a lot. If it sells for not so much money, he doesn't make much money, even though he does his piece of the work very well. And they have a very elaborate accounting system. You know, all of our accounting system and number theory was invented by the Muslims in the first place, specifically for this reason. A very elaborate accounting system to be able to account for how much that head of lettuce sold and to recompense all the people along the value chain. And you might think, oh my God, that's really complicated. But you know, in terms of actual hassle, actual complexity, it's less complicated than all the rigmarole that's associated with borrowing money. Borrowing money and certifying the action that's associated with that loan is a tremendous drag on the way that commerce is done. So Iran was actually at the top of the list. Iran was not, there's a lot of other interesting stuff to do there. But for reasons that are obvious, I'm not going to Iran. Number 2 on the list is Brazil. And Brazil, the reason that Brazil is near the top of the list is because some of the obvious stuff. You guys are just now emerging into a modern economy. You've opened your borders, which has been a real shock, and you've been able to learn how to adapt to that. You're going through this massive privatization scheme, and sort of you're beginning to learn and innovate ways to adapt to that. You're a very cosmopolitan populace in the sense of world awareness. You're big, you've got a lot of resources. You're closer to markets, the kind of market that would have to respond to agile stuff. You're much closer than the Pacific Rim nations, closer to the US and European markets. So all that's sort of obvious stuff, right? All that obvious stuff. But the stuff that really matters, you're going to scoff when I tell you. You're going to scoff. I know that it really bothers you, maybe, that the International Monetary Fund has its nose in your business. But that is a very, very good thing. That's a very good thing. The way the financial markets work in America and Europe, they're completely unconstrained, and they have politicians tinkering with them all the time. And all sorts of irrational things come into play. The International Monetary Fund, by definition, they prevent politicians from doing things that are unhealthy to the economy. That's the rules. Let me give you an example. In the US, everybody knows Netscape. Netscape was actually a company that we helped get going. we thought that was going to help electronic commerce. These guys put together a product. Now, this was a product that they made no money on. Their primary product, they made no money on. The business plan shows that they're going to lose money for as long as they can see. But they really have a big market share. The market share was growing and growing and growing. And the general industry was growing and growing and growing. Here was a business that had absolutely no reasonable business plan, no product that could make any money. They went public and issued stock. And in a couple months, that company was valued greater than General Motors. Greater than General Motors. Here's a company that the relationship to making money is completely irrelevant. How can this happen? You know, it wouldn't happen in Brazil. It wouldn't, because the relationship here, I'm making broad statements here. Here, if you're a good business, it means you make money. That's what it means. In the kinds of interesting technology businesses in America, if you are valued high, a highly valued organization, it's because you can crush the competition. And Netscape was valued highly because everybody thought they could crush Microsoft. There was a promise that they could put Microsoft out of business. That's why the value was so high. It had nothing to do with money. Nothing to do with money. It's very, very interesting and very confusing and very, very bad for the economy. Okay. So that's one reason. You've got the IMF. You're the only country that is a real country with a real economy that has this IMF governance in it. You're also the only country with a viable economy that's not blowing up, you know, or obsolete. Pacific Rim, I think, until all the cheap jobs are going to go to China, right? So all the jobs I'm talking about here are the very high profit, quick response, complex, combine and recombine sorts of responses that we're talking about, which constitute the majority of the world's economy. And I'll add the third reason. The third reason is a word I just learned the other day. I hope I get this right. JTO. Right? JTO. It's what the Americans had 100 years ago. They called it good old Yankee ingenuity. You know, we don't have it anymore, I'm afraid. But it's just the ability, you know, to make things work. You know, just whatever it takes, make it work. So I'm excited to be here. Let me, this is the last slide, and then we'll take some questions. Is that right? It's the last slide. If we have time for it, I'll just give you two examples of virtual enterprises. One is very agent-based. Agents, turns out with virtual enterprises, agents, the people who facilitate, instigate the formation of a virtual enterprise and sort of nurture it along is a common model for virtual enterprises. And that's the one that we see forming down here. It's the one that tends to work in the most general circumstances. Let me tell you an example of the most novel case we have of this. I helped them with this, put together this infrastructure. There's a railroad in the United States. Railroads are a strange business. If you want to grow your railroad, you already have, I mean, railroads are monopolies, right? So each area has one railroad. So you can't generate new business unless new business comes into your area. I mean, you already have all the customers that you can have. So if you want to grow your company, you basically have to be in the business development to grow the area. And so what we did was we went into this railroad. This was a multi-year project. We went into this railroad. They had operations research experts, actually one of the world's best collection of operations research experts. That's the discipline that you use to schedule the distribution and movement of all of your assets. But operations research is also some of the best tools that financial analysts use to predict trends and identify things that are happening in the marketplace. And we turned these people into a bunch of people who just looked for crazy ideas, looked for market opportunities, whether they had anything to do with railroads or whatever. Now remember, these are not people that make anything. They're not really a manufacturing business. They're the people. Did I tell you the example about Nike? No. They're the people that developed the idea to put the lights in Nike tennis shoes. Did I mention anything?
You should. You haven't. You haven't.
Oh, I haven't.
No.
Nike is a virtual enterprise. Nike doesn't own any factories. They don't even design their own shoes. They subcontract it all out. All they do is count the money. Nike is not a low-cost manufacturer. They don't sell more shoes because the shoes are cheaper. They sell more shoes because their shoes are cooler. Actually, you know, all the research into performance of the shoe, the actual value of what makes it good and whatever, that was all done by the U.S. Army. That's free, available for everybody. So all the research that they do is to make a shoe cool. And these people identified a market opportunity. You know, the kinds of people that buy, a large segment of the people that buy your shoes, if you put blinking lights in the bottom of your shoe, you can sell a lot of shoes. But you've got to get in, satisfy that market, and then get out before it becomes a commodity market. And probably this fad is only going to last for a year and a half anyway. That's the kind of thing that they would identify, they would work with. But rather than get into that example, I'll continue with this one. So they identified all sorts of interesting market opportunities, and then they would sort of run a filter through them, and the filter would be, are there some unique capabilities with the people in our area or other kinds of resources in our area that can take specific advantage of this opportunity? Now, this doesn't have to be just a good opportunity. It has to be a good opportunity, and we have something to offer. And this particular area had some unique characteristics and skills of companies in the area. And what they would do is they would say, all right, we're going to try and put together this business. So they would go to local people. Let's say a third of what they need to do is already there. They'd go to the local businesses and say, we're going to go get somebody to make something, and we want you to be a part of it. Then usually they go to Europe. They go to Europe, and they find a company to be the prime contractor. And in almost every case, that company wouldn't know what the railroad was talking about. Right? They'd be making one thing. And the railroad company would come in and say, you know, I know you don't make la-la-la. You probably never heard of la-la-la. You don't know anything at all about la-la-la. But we have discovered that the processes that you use can be applied to this. Nobody's ever made this before. But you can. Come to the United States. We will help you find all your partners. We will help you with the architects and the engineers to build your plan. We will work with the local financial folks, and we will help you get through all your permits and all the certificates and stuff, which is a big barrier to many people doing business in the new country, much less in the market. And we will help you find the missing people in your supply chain. And come. And they had many successes like this. So they were the agent that made this thing happen. And then, usually just a few months, 6 months after this thing was up and running, they would remove themselves from the virtual enterprise and go back, usually to be the railroad supplier of basic transportation services, which is a very small part, mostly not virtual. That made them look really good in Wall Street's eyes. You have to understand the way the railroad business works. The way the railroad business works is, in the U.S., you grow, if your region is growing, and it's because of you, and you're doing very creative things, the stock analysts make your stock value go up. credit people say, well, they're a very well-managed company. Your credit rating goes up. That means your cost of money goes down. Railroads are a very capital-intensive business. The way you increase your profit is you decrease your cost of money. That's how you increase your profit in the railroad business. So there was a chain of logic here. We increase the profitability by lowering the cost, by making ourselves look good to the people who look at us, by doing innovative management techniques, by attracting businesses to do something that we don't know anything at all about. And they are so successful at this, they were able to go and buy the next biggest railroad in the country. And right now they're absorbing it. One more example. This is a different example. Usually virtual enterprises focus around some agent or some prime contractor. Remember I told you about automobiles. Actually, this is true with airplanes as well. The only reason that we have big companies to make complex products is to coordinate everything. That's really the only reason. The only reason we have Ford to make Ford cars is because we need Ford, because we can't figure out an alternative infrastructure to be able to handle all of the essentially information and coordination activities that go on in these infrastructures that I told you about, the bubbles. One of the key ones being the liability issues. But we were approached by Nissan. We were approached by an unnamed Japanese manufacturer. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to get into the car business with no capital assets. They wanted to build cars without buying any equipment, without buying any machinery, without really doing anything but coordinating using internet technologies. And the thing that they were leveraging is, you might not know this, everybody knows that automobile manufacturing is consolidated in very large, very few companies. Automobile repair is thousands, hundreds of thousands of very small companies. Which business do you think is bigger? Repair. Where's the more innovation? Remanufacturing and all this other stuff. It's all in these small companies. And they're all sort of islands unto themselves. And what we wanted to do with this project was take advantage of a lot of all this distributed innovation and manufacturing capability, and to be able to make cars one or two at a time. You might make a Volvo in the factory and then make a Nissan in the same factory. People get access to the parts and the designs. And the idea was, in the car business, one of the biggest costs in the car business is you have to make a car, ship it to somebody's showroom, let it sit around there, and just hope that somebody walks by and likes that car and buys it. Very bad, very bad. What they'd really like to do is they'd like to do what Michael Dell does. Somebody decides they want a car, you build that car, and then you send in that car. So you don't have all of this money tied up in inventory and trying to anticipate consumer preferences, which you can never do right. You can never make all the right models and colors and everything. So they were thinking that this would be part of what they call the 6-day car, where somebody could ask for a car, and they could actually get from a catalog a number of different designs, including you could ask for a brand new 1965 Mustang, and have that car be assembled in an area near you. And because the numbers were so great, and so the thing that we worked with them here was the virtual enterprise mechanisms and some internet-based tools. The partners were going to be an unnamed Japanese company, which was really basically going to leverage their ability to manage continuing engineering change. The local telephone company, which is a Bell operating company, and an unnamed major financial facility that was going to act as the certifying and financing agent for a lot of the transactions. The numbers on this are so amazingly good that an act of Congress was passed to forbid it. So we didn't do this. But I can tell you that we ran through enough of this to be able to tell you that it is an eminently doable thing. In my lifetime, we're going to make cars and airplanes without major companies. I can guarantee you. Is that enough?
Yeah, sure.
Antes de eu passar para as perguntas, deixa eu só... Antes de eu passar para as perguntas, então, eu queria só fazer alguns comentários sobre como que essa palestra chegou a acontecer e por que ela foi desse jeito. So, I'll do in Portuguese. Okay. So, dentro do núcleo de manufatura avançada, existem 11 grupos de pesquisa, todos relacionados basicamente com manufatura. E um dos grupos se chama Grupo de Empresas Virtuais, que é o grupo que eu estou coordenando. Os trabalhos nossos dentro desse termo de empresas virtuais começaram em cima, há uns 3 anos atrás, em cima daquele framework que ele mostrou na figura de 5 grandes processos, né? Nós começamos estudando aquilo e tentando ver como que a gente poderia desenvolver isso dentro do Brasil. Então, foi a primeira oportunidade que a gente teve de entrar em contato com o TED. Assim, entrar em contato em termos, né? Saber que ele existia. O ano passado, a gente foi convidado para fazer parte de um congresso mundial sobre integração de empresas, o ECEIMT, e lá foi quando então a gente teve a chance de conhecer o TED pessoalmente. Depois daquilo, a gente teve mais 4 congressos juntos, e a gente sempre faz aquele convite, né? Se quiser ir para o Brasil, né? Interagir com a gente. Foi então que eu, no começo desse ano, em fevereiro ou março, ele me escreve um e-mail falando assim, o convite está de pé ainda? Aí eu fiquei, poxa, né? É lógico, né? E trouxemos ele para cá. Quando a gente trouxe, a gente não sabia bem direito o que ia acontecer. Na verdade, a gente estaria recebendo alguém que até surpreendeu, falando que ia ficar 2 semanas, quer dizer, ele está faz 4 dias aqui. E a gente sabia, bom, por que será que ele está vindo para cá? Foi quando, então, no primeiro dia, ele colocou aquela figura que, assim, espantou um pouco a gente, que nós somos o 2º lugar no mundo em termos de condições de criar esse modelo de negócios virtuais. Então, a ideia inicial da palestra era falar um pouco mais sobre manufatura pesada, mas depois que a gente conversou e viu, a gente falou assim, acho que a ideia é muito mais passar essa visão de novas formas de se organizar um negócio do que necessariamente falar sobre manufatura pesada, o hard, muito mais o lado soft. Então, por isso que a palestra foi por esse lado e através das reuniões que a gente está tendo com ele de trabalho e que vão continuar até a semana que vem aqui, fica então uma abertura, um convite para alguma empresa que queira conversar com ele durante a semana que vem, fazer uma visita, a gente pode organizar isso, a gente tem tempo para isso, tá? Nós estamos trabalhando hoje aqui, então, em cima de 3 princípios. Um é repensar a forma de relacionamento entre empresas, ou seja, partir muito mais para uma visão de relação de confiança, de regras de ética, porque a partir do momento que você tem parceiros confiando no seu trabalho, é uma parceria de longo prazo que você consegue reduzir uma série de custos que você tem que gerar para ter um parceiro, digamos assim, confiável a nível de lei. Esse é um princípio. O segundo é sobre tentar ajudar as empresas a identificarem suas competências e não só seus produtos. Então, aí é que talvez o maior número de exemplos que ele deu, e que a gente também tem alguns, fazem a gente se questionar a forma como as estratégias são definidas, como é que eu defino o produto que eu faço. A gente tem um exemplo que a gente usa aqui, que é o vaporetto. Então, como que surgiu o vaporetto na Itália? A principal competência técnica ou de produto dentro do vaporetto é fazer vapor de alta pressão em módulos pequenos. Né? Então, não sei se alguém consegue chutar, além dos meus alunos aqui de pós que já sabem, né? O porquê foi que o vaporetto surgiu na Itália. É porque essa tecnologia de vapor já era usada em cafeterias ou máquinas de café cappuccino. Ela simplesmente, essa competência foi transferida para um outro produto. Então, o segundo princípio que a gente está querendo desenvolver e trabalhar aqui é ajudar as empresas a identificarem sua competência. E, em cima disso, é se divulgar no mundo via competência e não só via produto. Para ser encontrado, que nem estava falando, essa companhia de trem americana, que está procurando no mundo quem tem novas oportunidades de negócio ou competência, que pode gerar um novo negócio nos Estados Unidos para, então, vir a linha de trem para chegar até esse negócio. E a terceira é tentar agrupar as empresas com cultura ou competências semelhantes em um grupo. E como hoje a gente tem tecnologias de informação e comunicação que permitem romper a barreira de espaço, eu posso criar, inclusive, redes globais de cultura similar, ou de negócios similares, ou de competências similares. Então, essas são 3 princípios que a gente está usando dentro do grupo. E, óbvio, a gente tem que descer para operacionalizar. Então, a gente também está trabalhando a nível de métodos e ferramentas. O principal método que a gente trabalha no NUMA é a visão de processos de negócio, a modelagem e a representação dos processos de negócio. Essa é uma ferramenta fundamental, a qual a gente, acho que hoje, já depois de 8 anos de trabalho, relativamente domina bem e já tem bastante experiência prática. A outra então, são de algumas ferramentas, né? Sistemas de telecooperação, que no Brasil ainda não são tão difundidos por causa da linha telefônica ruim que a gente tem ainda, né? Mas, assim, após a privatização, a gente acredita que a gente vai ter linhas digitais com largura de banda relativamente grande, onde vai permitir que eu trabalhe via videoconferência ou via compartilhamento de arquivos. E, enquanto eu estive na Alemanha nesses últimos 2 anos, eu fiz um projeto também numa empresa de manufatura, que eu não posso falar o nome, automobilística, mas fica em Munique. E a gente esteve trabalhando com eles justamente na implementação desses sistemas de telecooperação. O fim do projeto, a conclusão foi que, em termos de redução de tempos de mudança de projeto, por você ter a chance de interagir com o seu fornecedor, é de 30%. De custo, né? De custo relacionado com o tempo que você ganha ao conseguir interagir melhor com o seu fornecedor, com empresas dentro da Alemanha, e de 80% em termos de empresas que estão fora da Alemanha. Se a gente pensar que o Brasil é do tamanho quase da Europa, né? O maior ou menor, bom, em termos de escala, significaria, então, para o relacionamento entre empresas dentro do Brasil, quase, vamos chutar, de 60%, e com a maioria das empresas brasileiras estão relacionadas com multinacionais ou fornecem globalmente, é um potencial de ganho. Então, a gente trabalha a um nível de filosofia, mas também o tempo todo pensando que ferramentas eu posso usar para a empresa virtual, mas que eu também posso agilizar a forma como que as empresas hoje operam. A segunda ferramenta que a gente usa, principalmente, é a internet, do ponto de vista de como usar e como desenvolver soluções para otimizar a cooperação entre empresas, né? E o convite, então, fica para visitar o NUMA, outros elementos que a gente faz, toda a parte de sensoriamento inteligente de chão de fábrica, a parte de CAD, CAI. Tá? Então, o que a gente tenta fazer é desenvolver soluções que auxiliem as empresas no que a gente está chamando de dinamismo, tá? E, óbvio, interagir com as empresas para que isso passe para elas, né? Então, a gente tem aqui presente, né, pessoas de indústria, professores, alunos. O pessoal mais novo de terno e gravata são os meus alunos, então qualquer coisa que vocês queiram, eles podem ajudar vocês, né? E a gente vai ter, então, uma série de visitas ou de reuniões aqui para o pessoal de indústria que queira ficar, então, com a gente, só repetindo. Quem quiser almoçar com a gente, nós temos reserva, então, já no restaurante, fique aqui depois da palestra. E depois do almoço a gente volta e dá uma passeada no NUMA, tá bom? Então, agora a gente marcou 9 horas, relativamente cedo, né? Justamente para ter espaço para bastante pergunta e interação, já que é raro trazer alguém aqui do skill do TED. Então, eu abro, então, para perguntas e peço que as pessoas façam no microfone, tá? E eu coordeno, desculpa, eu coordeno, então, as mãos, quem que quer começar? Bom, quem puder, faça em inglês, senão eu traduzo.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited about the theme of the speech. I would like to know how to see and handle with Brazilian lack of education and misery, and if you put our future in such a high standard. Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure I have a good answer for that. The general philosophy is that the best thing for a country is to have an extremely robust economy, and that helps everybody. This question was actually raised last night. It was raised in a context of, well, if we have these big, ugly, obsolete companies and we replace them with agile, profitable virtual enterprises, won't that put a lot of second-rate people out of work? Won't that be bad? And I don't know. I don't think anyone would argue that we need to have obsolete companies that employ people that don't add any value just to provide jobs. So the strategy that we're sort of, the philosophy that we're hoping here is that anywhere, I mean Brazil or anywhere, I mean we do have similar problems, generally speaking, maybe even harder to solve problems in some cases in the U.S. And the idea is if you make it possible for a single person or a group of him and his friends to be a viable business, a real business, not just shining shoes or whatever, but part of making cars, just a small group with a small investment but good ideas and good industry, that's probably better. That's probably better than trying to get big companies somehow to swallow up unqualified people. I don't think I have the best answer, but that's the general philosophy anyway. It would be good if we could free. The bad part about big companies is that there's a threshold for you to become a useful member of that company, and once you're in that company, you can never be fully as creative as you would otherwise be if you were making your own decisions. So in theory, it's maybe a utopian idea, but in theory, this idea of empowering people in ones and twos and tens and 20s to be able to be very profitable, creative parts of big, complex products, make a lot of money. That's more democratizing and opening up of opportunities than the alternatives. But it's not an overnight solution, for sure.
Seu microfone.
I got just one question. Here in Brazil, who will be the agent? Not the government, not the military? Who? We don't have a culture for this. What's your suggestion or ideas about this?
That I have a good answer for. I have a good answer for that one. We've tried an awful lot of experiments in the United States, and we know something about this. The best, when you're starting from scratch, the best agents, the kind of brokers that we're talking about, now not real, robust, integrated agents like I described in the movie industry, but the kind of agents that are like the railroad company that sort of help identify and sort of help tie and stitch things together and raise the level of awareness and operations. That kind of broker is best suited in a research university or an industry organization, which is, of course, why I'm down here working with NUMA. We have many cases, and all over the world, it is true that there are organizations like this one that are performing this broker role for such virtual enterprises. Now, it also is true, we have enough experience with this to know that after the first one or two, you start to develop a culture in an area that becomes very attractive to a certain type of person. And the entrepreneurial spirit really is to be an arranger, to be a broker. And so once you sort of light the fire, it sort of just catches on in an area. So the answer is primarily organizations like NUMA who are interested in both advancing the nature of business process modeling, which is the primary enabler here, and the state of the local economy, and have a sort of an interactive program with local companies. So, does that answer the question? Yeah.
Eu ia falar no fim, mas já que você deu o gancho, né? A gente já está há 1 mês e meio montando aqui, então, em São Carlos, o que a gente chama de uma organização virtual, ou seja, um grupo de, principalmente, pequenas e médias empresas no começo, predispostas a cooperarem, a entrarem nesse ambiente de negócios virtuais. E a gente estaria, então, no princípio, atuando como agente. Então, nós estamos hoje já com 12 empresas que são parceiras. O nome vai ser Organização Virtual de Tecnologia, ou a Virtec. E a gente espera, então, em fim de julho, estar tendo o lançamento oficial, inclusive com site na internet. E o trabalho que a gente está fazendo com eles é, então, esse que eu falei, de identificação de competência, divulgação, desenvolvimento de ferramentas na internet. E através desses contatos com os Estados Unidos e com um exemplo que já existe, que é a fábrica virtual de Bodensee, na Suíça, a gente vai tentar se ligar com eles, inclusive para tentar alavancar essas pequenas e médias empresas de São Carlos, cuja competência é global e o mercado talvez seja mundial, porque são produtos de base tecnológica, de fazer eles ingressarem no mercado europeu e americano. Então, se alguém quiser ter mais informações, a gente tem ainda vagas. A gente está limitando o número de empresas em 15, para a gente poder gerenciar, não ser grande demais. Então, a gente está aberto também a empresas que têm interesse, né? A gente tem alguns representantes de empresa aqui. Então, nós estamos começando a testar esse modelo aqui. I just was telling them we are setting up this bidding consortium.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm on the manufacturing side. I left the university environment more than 30 years ago. We have a lot of problems in Brazil, and the universities sometimes don't know exactly about them. Now, this university is an exception in a way that it has an institute that's called FIPE, and they made a calculation according to which we manufacturers have a disadvantage, a cost disadvantage of more than 40% against foreign manufacturers due to the tax situation, which is very weird. Manufacturing is taxed and not exactly the consumer. More than 40%. This was not important when this was a closed economy because everybody had the same problem. But now we have to be 40% better cost-wise than Koreans or Chinese or whatever. And our big enemy in this seems to be Congress. The executive government is probably has the knowledge of this problem, and there are laws being proposed, but they don't go on. Do you have an idea how this could be accelerated?
Actually, we have an awful lot of experience trying to manipulate Congress. And it turns out that that is one of the things that big companies are very good at. And so the question was posed to us: if you're going to transform some significant portion of the manufacturing economy into this new model of doing business, how are you going to continue to, I mean, by definition, governments pretty much always screw things up. I mean, how are you going to be able to keep them sort of in tune with the policies that are the best for the country? And if all you have is just 1,000 small voices instead of one extremely powerful voice, how are you going to do that? I didn't show for purposes of brevity, I didn't show who is working with us on some of this more important research. But one group is this Work and Technology Institute, a think tank in Washington, D.C., who spends its time on two issues. One, the one that you raised, which is how do we affect laws. And it's not just Congress. It has to also do with the accounting and financial marketplace. How do you affect them to change their practices? And they also were concerned about workforce issues, like who takes care of the medical insurance and the continuing education and the pension guarantees for people who are part of this enterprise today and part of that enterprise tomorrow and maybe 6 months off and then part of, recombining it in. These are big issues that big institutions tend to deal with well and small ones poorly. So there's been a fair amount of thinking. There's been a book written out of our research, which I can get you the name for. But it probably is going to be that this new model, like cars, you might not need Ford to actually do the manufacturing, but you'll need Ford to help manipulate the laws, manipulate the customer, because a lot of what Ford does is manipulate the customer, and to be able to deal with some of the very large macro things like recalls, and liabilities, and environmental cleanup, and pensions and insurance and stuff like that. Let me say something, though. In your question, you were concerned about being competitively cost-wise. One of the things that we're really aiming at is that there are many, many businesses where you just don't want to compete on cost. You don't want that to be the primary criteria, because that's a very unhappy business to be in. You never can make much money, and you're always in danger, probably, of your job going to China in the next 10 years, because you just can't compete on cost with China. You just will not be able to. We can't, you can't, nobody can. So what we would like to see people be competing on is very high profit, very high value, quick in, maybe quick out products. That's your market niche. Let the Chinese have the pencil business, because it's probably going to go over there, because nobody can compete with the Chinese. So I just wanted to say that that probably in this nature of business, a large part of the world's economy is this way. There's a sort of a minimum target for cost that you have to hit, but then there's a sort of a responsiveness like Nike has. Nike has to make its shoes at a certain price. But if the price of their shoes doubled, if it doubled, they wouldn't miss a heartbeat. Because it's really high profit stuff. The computer industry, if the price of disk drives goes up 0.1%, it's going to kill somebody, right? Because they're low cost commodity organization. You don't want to be in that business. I don't want to be in that business anyway.
When you started to talk about the reasons why Brazil was sort of chosen as a good site for virtual enterprises, I was really surprised by the fact that you've included the International Monetary Fund as a sort of important topic on this list. Because for us, I'm not sure, well, if that is the opinion of the majority, but the International Monetary Fund is not preventing the Brazilian politicians to spend badly the money here. Well, we've got a lot of examples. I can give you, for instance, you were talking about the railroad business. Well, here, our
railroad network is a joke. I mean, nothing compared with the roads by trucks and cars. The drought in industry, as we call right now at Northeast, is also a bad example of how the Brazilian politicians spend badly the money. So for us, the International Monetary Fund is sort of an agency for guarantee that Brazil is paying its international debt. So there is nothing to guarantee that the next government, the International Monetary Fund, is going to have a role here in Brazil. And because you put as the fund as an important item, how can it be that? I mean, if the next government, the International Fund, is no longer here, still Brazil is going to be an important site for virtual enterprises.
Yeah. I'm going to give basically two answers here. The first answer is that I'm not knowledgeable enough in these affairs to be able to completely describe the mechanics of even how the IMF affects an economy. What we had was world experts come in and advise us and tell us, if we continue this collaboration, we'll probably make some of that available. But the way it was described to me is different than the way that the question was posed, and I probably didn't explain it very well. I mentioned politicians, but I didn't mean to imply that the thing that was important was how politicians spend national funds. What's important is how politicians write laws that affect the financial markets, that affect how companies are valued and how accounting practices are executed. So, and the example I used was, we often have the case in the U.S. where a company is valued very highly even though it's a bad business by rational standards. And the value of the IMF, in fact, it's in the charter of the IMF.